Hi everybody. For those of you who remember, when the pandemic first struck, I took to the tower studio room and began working on St. Francis. He's finally finished, and I'm thrilled with the results. It took me about 4 months, and I thought you might enjoy seeing each stage along the way. So I'm going to show you some of the other photos if you want, and you can see how he developed. First, you need a drawing. This is the image that I created, and after you know you're satisfied with it, you put it on transfer paper, and then you transfer it onto a gesso board. The reason being, icons are traditionally painted with egg tempera, and egg tempera can crack. You don't want it to be on anything that has any bend or anything. You want it to be pretty stiff. And the gesso that covers the board, once you've got the image on it, you use an etching tool and you etch in those lines. The reason for that, you'll see, is because as you proceed, the colors you begin with are very dark and murky, and you might not be able to see the lines well. Once you've gotten that on the board, the next thing you do is you take a clay bowl. It's a red clay. You mix it with some animal hide glue that gives it that binding ability. And once you have the right texture, or consistency rather, you paint it on there. The idea is to keep it very smooth if you can. Once it's hardened and dried, you take sandpaper and a burnishing tool, and you keep going over and over and over it until that red clay becomes glass-like. It's polished, it's smooth as glass, and then you're ready to put the gold on. When you get ready to lay that gold down, you have sheets of 24 karat gold. You breathe. You bend down and breathe over that clay, and the moisture of your breath makes it a little sticky. That's what the gold adheres to. And it also is reminiscent of when God created, he breathed life into Adam, and it's the same kind of, I think about God breathing life into the world. When I was creating this icon, as I was doing that, I could imagine God breathing life into the world around me, because that was a time when everything was shut down. And we saw amazing videos and pictures all over the world where the smog was clearing. Animals were coming out and into neighborhoods where they were once didn't feel welcome. It was that sort of reawakening of the earth that was happening just at that time when I was writing this icon. Anyway, once you have the gold on, the red line is the very next thing around the halo, and that red line is called Venchik, and it represents the beginning of the iconographical journey. Once you do that, then you're ready to paint. First thing you do is make the egg mixture. You separate the yolk from the white, and you have just pure egg yolk. You puncture the hole in the sac of the yolk, and then you drain out the yolk. I mix dry white wine with that. That kind of preserves it. You could use vinegar. Some people use distilled water. But you can take that mixture and mix it with dry pigment to get the color you want. The very first layer you see here, you always start out with dark, murky colors. Traditionally, the hands and the face and hair are an olive green. I added a little bit of red to my green, and it came out a little more brown than usual. That's okay. I still am very happy with the effect. But the idea is that you do this, it's almost modeled, as you can see. The white board behind you can still see the white coming through. That's the light of God. And we look for that light to be seen and reflected throughout the icon. This is called Rosh Krish. Rosh Krish is usually dark and heavy. It's grittier pigment, and that's it. And the Russian word is raskrivat, and that means to open. So the white is shining through means life. So remember how God created out of chaos. This Rosh Krish, the dark murky colors, represent chaos. And that's where we begin. Now, the next thing we do is apply the first light. We take a color that's complementary or a lighter shade of whatever the base color is, and then we cover about 2/3 of the area with this highlight. See how on the face, about 2/3 of the face is covered? That creates the outline, the base color for what we see. Now the dove, I know you're thinking, what is she doing with blue? Well, when you watch, you put a float over each layer of light. And the float I'm going to use on the dove is more of a crimson color, and it's going to create a soft purple. And that's going to be the undertones for the dove, but it will ultimately end up looking white, I promise you. The first highlight, though, is underpainting. It represents the light of nature, or the cosmic highlight. This indicates the natural light of the universe, bringing order to the chaos we talked about earlier. The second, so here's a picture of the float over that first light. See what happens? With each float, it functions like a veil. You take a veil and you just lay it over that first light. The second highlight, see what happens? You don't cover quite as much area, but you use a lighter, more intense color that complements the first highlight. And this represents the anthropos, or the enlivening light of human intellect and culture. On the garments, the second highlight provides a sense of dynamic tension, almost as though the saint has just moved or may soon move again. Now, this second light is an opening of the inner light of humankind. It's the division of light within light, and it reviews the light of the soul itself. Often this method is very different from the first. I chose to continue the flowing aspect because of the robe, but in many icons there's this multifaceted diamond effect that gives you that sense of movement in this second light. The task of the second float then is to cover that second interior light, since it's not perfect light yet. By that I mean a perfect spiritual light. The float opens opportunity for more spiritual light to come through. So this is a picture of that with the float over it. Now, when we get to the third light represents the celestial angelic hierarchy. Its meaning is the motion that we feel in it is of angelic light. Remember, the first light was about life, creation. The second light allows us to see ourselves. And then the third light allows us to contemplate God. And it is where God is, angels surround him. Once we've put the float over the third light, there is a tiny final light that is applied, and there's no float put over that. But it represents uncreated light, and those are the enlivenings. So remember, the first light is life. The second is light within light, our humanity. The third one is angelic. All three of those first ones are created light, but this Oshaviki is the nature of uncreated light. Very tiny, tiny, small highlights. Uncreated light transforms the power of the soul in expectation for the resurrection. And then as you go on, you notice this is back, the third light with a float over the robes. So once you get beyond that and you see the final details taking shape, you work on the face and the hands, and you're putting lines on, and you're ready to be done. But you see that there's still that red line there. When you get completely finished, this white line around the halo is the very last thing that goes on besides the lettering. And the white light is the culmination of the spiritual journey of theosis, or becoming like God. This white line represents the perfected spirit of men and women through their communion with God. When the icon is all done, see, I finally got the letters on it. I usually bring it into the church. Tradition is you leave it in the sanctuary for weeks. I like to leave it for at least a month, maybe 2. Let it just sit in the presence of God and the Holy Spirit surrounding it. When it's dry, and it takes quite a while, but after months, when it's cured and it's totally dry, then you would seal it. The traditional sealant is olive oil, and that's really a linseed oil mixture. You warm it a little bit so you can pour it, and then you pour it over the icon in the shape of a cross. And then you spread it with the palm of your hand. And you just keep doing this for a number of days, making sure it's totally covered, and that will harden and dry and protect the paint underneath. The reason we pour it in the shape of a cross is it's a reminder of the oil of our baptism. So that's why we finish and seal it in that way. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps sometime soon you will see my next icon. I've already begun one. I'll surprise you. God bless.